I am so very excited to welcome our next guest here to Off the Podium, a true legend of both the Olympics and the Paralympics. Across 5 different Paralympics she competed in, she won a total of 21 medals, including 14 gold. And that is an equal record amount of medals won at the Paralympics by a Canadian. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome to this podcast today Chantal Petitclerc. Chantal, first of all, welcome to Off the Podium.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
It's such an honor, and I actually want to start this interview out slightly differently because you are also the first guest we've ever had on this show who has a direct line to the Prime Minister of a country. You are a senator, Chantal.
I am a senator.
You have a direct line to the Prime Minister, Mr. Justin Trudeau. I feel like right now I need to redo that introduction and play some trumpets or something like this. This is a big deal for us here on Off the Podium.
It's good to be here. Yes, the line is not so direct because the Senate now is independent, non-partisan. So
right, okay. So there's no you can't just get him on the phone and just be like, "Hey, what's up, Justin? How you doing?" You know, it's just there might be a few different barriers you need to kind of get to him.
Exactly.
Exactly. I mean, I just want to quickly on that. Obviously with your esteemed career, we're going to talk about that, but. Was this always a goal for you to get into politics? Because we've discussed a lot on this show about some of athletes in Australia as well who sort of have a great career at the Olympics and the Paralympics, go on to be a politician. I'm thinking of Matt Cowdrey, one of our great Paralympians, of course, is now an esteemed politician. One of our great Winter Olympians in Australia, Zali Steggall, is now a federal politician. I mean, is this something that you always looked at, a path that athletes kind of always like to go towards to become a politician?
No, not at all. And I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but I know here, when I retired anyways, I had a bit of a profile with the medals and everything. And so the phone rings and politicians, they want you, from different parties, and they want you to jump in. And I didn't want to do that, and it wasn't my plan. But something happened 8 years ago in Canada when the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had this idea of modernizing the Senate and turning it into a less partisan, more independent. So that I was interested in. And it just, it's just one of those things when I retired from sport, I did a little bit of coaching for UK athletics. I was chef de mission. Like many Paralympians and medalists, I did a lot of media, a lot of inspirational keynotes. And I was just at that point where I was asking myself, okay, where do I dive in? Do I want to stay in sport? Do I want to go back to school? Do I want to continue with the communication and media? And so the phone rang, and I just thought it was too good a challenge, I think, and also an opportunity to try to make a difference. There was no senator with disability at the time, and I thought, the voice of persons with disability in Canada needs to be in the Senate a little more.
And I guess since that opportunity's come about, what you've done, what you've achieved, it's obviously been a few years now. Do you feel that that's something that you've been able to do, you've achieved, sort of have that voice that you're sort of talking about there?
Well, so when I was appointed in the Senate, one of the things that a friend of mine and lawyer told me, he said, because my first question was, can I make an impact? Like, I just don't want to be there just because I'm a Paralympian and a medalist and they wanted to have my name on that list of new senators, but can I make a difference? Can I make an impact? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. And so the answer from this friend was yes, but you have to really get into the mindset that you're going to go from sprinting to ultra marathons. And that's how it feels, because change it's hard, it's long, and changing and the legislation, it just takes a long time. But yes, I do feel I'm making a difference. I wish it was sometimes quicker. I wish we could fix things a little better. And some things sometimes are just, when it comes to accessibility and inclusion, some things are just so obvious, and you just want to say, okay, why does it take so long? But I'm
Yeah.
glad I'm there. I'm glad I'm there, and I think it does make a difference.
We're talking of making a difference in your athletic career. I mean, as I touched on in the introduction there, 5 Paralympics, 21 medals across those years. We had Michael Edgson on the show a couple of months back and sort of talked to him about his career and everything that he saw sort of throughout, his time and the changes across the Paralympic movement. Your first Paralympics, 1992. Your last Paralympics, 2008. I mean, he talked about the significant change from the 80s across all the way through to the 90s. What did you see with the changes sort of from your first games in Barcelona, which was a bit of a key Paralympics, I believe, right through to Beijing with all the improvements it made? I mean, did you kind of see the movement really progress and towards what we're obviously seeing now, what we've just seen in Paris and things like that?
No, I mean, I think it's amazing. We forget sometimes that the Paralympic movement is not, it's not that old,
Mm.
and it's grown so fast when you think, like, it doesn't feel like it's fast enough when you're a Paralympian and you're fighting to open so many doors, and it takes time, but when I think back about my first game, and again with the perspective of being a Canadian athlete, in Barcelona, I remember coming back with 2 medals, and no one was waiting at the airport. You do a couple local interviews. You have no sponsorship. The funding, it's there, but it's not quite there. You're part of Athletics Canada, but you're not really. And so it's still very, you're still very isolated, I suppose, and not recognized. And I think for me, I remember the thing that really annoyed me the most was you come back with medals, and a few years after, maybe world records and gold medals in Atlanta, and people, all they want to do is talk about your accident and how you became a person with a disability, and it's all about the courage, and it's all about you being that hero somehow that you never really chose to be. And I'm glad that's over. And when I retired, I remember when I retired in Beijing, but even before that, I remember, for me anyways, in Canada, a big switch in 2000 with the games in Sydney, and
Mm.
me winning that medal, racing with Louise Sauvage from Australia. And there was this big thing in the media because, someone crashed in the race. And so it wasn't about the crash in the race, and they had, we had a protest and all of that. But the fact that in Canada, everybody woke up, it seems like, to, oh my God, this is high performance. This is good. This is entertaining. It's fast. And then in Beijing, for me, I thought, when I retired and I came back home, and when I was at the games in Beijing, for many reasons, I chose to isolate myself. I had no social media access. I did not read my emails. So I was really in that high performance, I want to win 5 medal bubble. So when I came back home, it just hit me how I was everywhere. And then I was, winning athlete of the year among all other amateur, Olympic, Paralympic, professional athletes. So all of that to say that I thought, okay, we've made it. And I'm so impressed to see that it wasn't the finish line, like it's still growing. And I think this is really exciting. I think also in Canada, for the longest time, it felt anyways that at every game, the country would kind of pick up 2, 3, I want to call them Paralympian spokesperson. So it's not like the country was following the games. They picked up a few athletes, and I was part of them, very lucky and privileged for me. And they just, and that was it. But now I think it's so good to see that the media and the country is following the team, and many athletes, and I think this is for me, the big change. Mm.
We see that a lot in Australia. I was in Paris for the Olympics, came back to Australia just as the Paralympics were starting, and the vibe and everything was still there. And then we saved all our welcome home parades in Australia once Paralympians were back as well. So it was kind of like a shared experience for both, and obviously that growth. I'm glad you mentioned Sydney and Louise Sauvage, because of course I wouldn't be here to talk to you if I wasn't going to bring that up. I love the quote that I read from you, Chantal, about your rivalry with Louise Sauvage, that you basically dreamt more about her than you did your boyfriend at the time because of how strong that rivalry was. I mean, reflecting on that and sort of the battles that you both had over your career. I mean, I hope that you go to sleep now and you don't sort of still dream about Louise. Maybe you've sort of, the dreams have changed slightly maybe 20 or so years later.
Yep. It was, well, Louise Sauvage was a very committed and focused and talented athlete. She's a natural. And so when I started racing, she was my big rival for 10 years before I succeeded in winning a gold medal with her. So it's a long time. It's a long time to be, determined and focused. And I was very competitive. And the fact that she was also, she was bigger than me, like big muscles, long arms, and a lot of people just did not believe that I could do that. And a lot of athletes and teammates were just saying, well, maybe second is what you have. Just be happy with second, because she's so amazing and she's so great and she's got these muscles, and so it is something I'm quite proud of, because I never gave up on trying every single time, dozens of times a year. And I remember when I did win that race in Sydney, and it was very difficult for Louise because we're in Australia, and she was very, very classy about it. She was very classy and elegant about it. And again, after that, she never tried, and we kept that spirit. And that's for me. That is the most fun about sport is just the adrenaline. Like I love that, the adrenaline, not knowing what's going to happen, and some sort of I want to call it a very positive aggressivity, and just trying to be there and want to. So it was a good time. It was a good time.
And not for Australia at the time, though, I'll say, Chantal, because to paint the picture, for people who maybe don't remember or sort of weren't around at that point, Louise Sauvage was as big of an athlete you could get in Australia. She lit the cauldron, of course, at those Paralympics, an absolute household name in the country. And I believe she was undefeated in that event, the 800 metres, for 8 years. And you go out and beat her in Stadium Australia. So for Australians at the time, not a great deal. But there was, as you sort of touched on before, there was a lot more to it. So there was a crash, there was a protest, there was a potential rerun of the race. Can you sort of remember all of that period when they were talking about redoing it, and then eventually I believe the Canadian team put the protest in, you get to keep the medal. You've won a gold medal, but then you've got to sort of wait around. I can't imagine what that period is like for you.
Oh my God. It was, I think, it's funny. I never had that conversation with Louise, but I know that it was nerve-wracking for both of us, for sure, because for her, she had been undefeated on that distance for over 8 years. It was my first time to actually do it. We had nothing to do. We were way up in front, and there was a crash at the tail of the race. When I finished the race, I didn't even know there had been a crash in the race. And so the countries involved in the crash wanted to redo the crash. I didn't want to redo that race, because I'm like, I've done it once. I can't guarantee I can do it twice. And Louise, again, she was very elegant, because she didn't push to rerun. She wasn't vocal about wanting to rerun. She was very, it's done. But deep down, I'm sure she's like, I want to redo that race, because it doesn't mean she's going to do it twice, right? But the worst was the media. I don't like media. it was a big thing because it was in Australia. She was famous in Australia. And for me, being a Paralympic athlete, I had never experienced, getting off the bus from the athletes' village at the stadium and having journalists with microphones on your face asking you for, comments. And she had the same thing. And it's not something, if you're a hockey player in Canada, you go through that. It's life. But when you're a Paralympic athlete, and especially in 2000, it's not something that was part of life. And people in the village, it was a big, big thing. And I remember after, I don't know how long it took because Canada, and I'm grateful for that because they wanted to have my back. And so they protested against the protest, and they went to court of arbitration, and there was an Australian on the court, like on the lawyers there, and we're like, oh, that's gonna be a tough one. And but I got to keep the medal, and Louise got to beat me the next day in the 15, I think. So
she got the revenge.
But it was it was a very, very intense moment for both of us. But I think it was good. I think it was good for the sport because it really showed how serious Paralympic sport was, and that it was about pushing limits, and there were rivalries, and so I think it turned out to be good for the sport.
As you said, it sort of was that moment where, you've got the journalists, you've got the attention, it's making headlines. I mean, I was 13 at the time. I remember sort of the big hoopla around it and kind of everything that sort of came with that. And obviously, as I said, Louise Sauvage, absolute household name in the country. Your next two Paralympics, Athens, Beijing, 5 gold medals at each of those games. I asked a similar question to Michael Edgson when we had him on a couple of months ago, Chantal, and I'd love to get your thought on this. When you get to like gold medal 13, gold medal 14, are you just kind of like, another one, put it on the pile, this'll do? Or do they still kind of hit the same? Like, 14th Paralympic gold medal, you're here in Canada, it's still kind of a bit the same like the first time you ever hear that.
Oh, no, it never gets old. It never gets old. And especially, I think, for me, it was about the medal for sure, but it was also about the speed and world record. I remember every of these races and what I wanted to achieve and what kind of time or what kind of strategy. And I think that's actually how I got to medals. Is not focusing on the medal, but just thinking, what is it that I want to do? And I've always had, every athlete is different, but I've always had a lot of fun trying to just push limits and just to see how fast we can go. I remember before Beijing taking the world record, the men's world record, and I think Kurt Fernie from Australia was one of those record holder, and South African guy also. And so what I did is I analyzed their world record and tried to transpose it into women's. And I thought, which really doesn't mean anything, to be honest. But then I'm like, okay, if we can do that, and if I do some sort of a ratio and proportionality, I should be hitting that speed. And then I made that my goal.
Wow.
And we broke it down into, to win the record in the 800, by 100 meter, I need to push this, and by 200, which really for me, I had a lot, very thrilling. So, and I think that's key. If you want to last a long time, it can't be just about the medals. It has to be that you really enjoy all the aspect of being and becoming the best that you can be at something that is very technical. So I miss that. I think I miss that. I don't
There's
get
a
that
marathon now in politics,
Senate,
not quite the sprint, as you say. That's fascinating. I don't think I've ever quite heard an athlete admit that there sort of is a comparative way you can look at, say, the opposite gender's time or sort of something like that to kind of set yourself a goal? I mean, is that just very strong math? Are you working with your coaches and kind of trying to break down the averages? I mean, how do you even sort of remotely come up with a comparative time to work towards?
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure it has any scientific value into it. But I don't know. I think I don't even know why I had this idea. But I remember at the time I looked, I just looked at the speed and the top speed in the male division, and I was already dominant, and I guess I just wanted to push myself in a little more. And so I made some time, with my coach, we kind of estimated some sort of a modeling of the time, but does it, I don't know.
It just sounds so like I like
but
that.
But it's really, I think it's revealing of how the drive and the drive that I had and how I always needed, to push some sort of limit, I suppose. But it was fun.
I can imagine. I mean, on that, you talk about that competitive instinct. I, again, asked this question to Michael sort of on the reverse of it. He held the record, 21 medals in total at the Paralympics, and I sort of asked him, were you a little bit worried about Chantal there in Beijing catching or maybe breaking that 21 medals? The opposite for you. Were you aware of this record, and were you in Beijing going, got to get to 21, got to equal that record that Michael has set?
I was not aware. And some days I think, maybe I should have done the 5.
Get to 22. Wow. You come out of retirement.
I was not aware of that. But thinking back, I'm like, one more.
One more.
No,
wow.
but I'm quite, it's a privilege to be, sharing that record with him.
Have that. And you at least know how many you've got. Michael famously on this show said he actually doesn't know the exact number he has won because the records were kept differently in the day. Just on that, what do you do with the medals? We always ask our medalists on the show, Chantal, what you do with them. I mean, you've got a bunch. I'm sure, I don't know, do you just hand them out for Christmas at in the stocking, or what do you do with them?
Well, it's funny because they're all in drawers somewhere. I don't know. I think I've got one in my car, which is really not smart. But when I go to schools, and I have one just here in my office. But what I did when I was appointed in the Senate for the first time, after retirement, I had them framed, nice. Just one per game, and I framed, which really. I think it was even more emotional for me. I framed my bib numbers, like the racing numbers from every game. And I remember when I did that, and they're all, wrinkled, and they've got some oil and they're dirty because they've been on the racing chair for 2 weeks. And it's good memories when I look at those bib number, the medals, of course. Yeah, of course. But for me, it's real. It's racing.
They've got the sweat on them, as you said. They've got the grease on them. That's what you work towards.
Exactly.
That's all those blood, sweat, and tears. Wow, fantastic to hear that, Chantal. It has been an absolute honour to be able to learn a little bit more about this and hear about your great career and all the great things, obviously, that you're still continuing to do for Canada and everything moving forward. I mean, people want to start that. We always give up people opportunity, social media, websites. Do people need to get ready to vote in Canada? Because I think you're going to, give us some plugs right now in terms of, a little bit different for you today than what our guests usually can do on this show.
Well, I'm at this time of my life that I don't have, I'm not self-promoting so much anymore. So that's a good thing. I will just say, Paralympics, let's all follow the Paralympics. And maybe even, if I would be to plug something, I would say the corporate, or, the businesses, the corporate, they need to jump in on our Paralympians. Paralympians everywhere on the planet, they're back home. And the phone rings for them to speak at schools, the phone rings for them to be volunteering and this, but let's call them and offer them some good sponsorship. That's what's missing in the Paralympic movement.
100%. That's the best plug we've ever had on this show right there. I think you've summed it up well, Chantal. I really appreciate your time and thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you.